Hi guys, and welcome to the full product review of the Feiyu-Tech G4S 3-axis handheld gimbal. Now I'm going to have to start by saying I'm going to try and fly through this video as quick as I can because there's so much stuff I want to talk about, but the last time I tried to make a video like this earlier today, it went on for about 45 minutes before I even got to the product testing. So I'm going to get on very quickly and say, firstly, if you want to know what's in the box and the packaging, everything like that, watch the unboxing video where I go into all of that detail, do a bit of comparison. So there's no point in spending too much time on that. Lovely case, lovely box, very happy with it. Review side of the box all done, really happy with it, like really impressed with it, and I think it's a fantastic feature. Anyway, with that, let's take a look at how we're going to do this video. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take it out of the box. I'm going to show you from a design aspect all the things that have changed, some of the features that have changed. I'm going to talk about some of the bits and bobs that you may not even know about and Feiyu-Tech haven't really told you about. After that, I'm going to do some bench testing to show you the various modes kind of up close and personal, as it were, so you can see what the gimbal's doing. And then after that, I'm going to be showing you the demonstration footage, some of the stuff I took from the UK drone show, walking around, a little bit from that, as well as my usual kind of testing on a bike, testing walking, some outside stuff, so you can get a feel for what you get when you actually get this gimbal out and start using it. So hopefully that's going to cover everything, but like I say, I want to crack on as quick as I can because there's so much stuff that you probably haven't noticed about this that I think personally is well worthwhile having a look at. Anyone who knows my video channel knows that I will prattle on about this for absolutely ages, so feel free to skip forward. I'm not going to take it personally, but I do like to think that everything that I'm going to tell you about this is worthwhile knowing, especially if you are a previous owner of a G4 or a G3 Ultra or any handheld gimbal basically, or if you're a prospective buyer. I think it's stuff that you should know about, you know, that might tip the balance on something like this over even a Z1 Evolution, but of course it's all going to come down to performance. Okay, so let's get this thing out of the package. First, let's just take note the fact that the gimbal and camera do fit in this. Again, another great plus point in terms of the actual packaging that Feiyu-Tech have included with this. So to put it together, nice and simple, two batteries which are 900 milliamp each, 3.7. Slot them in the bottom part and then we just screw it on. Fantastic. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this kind of looking at the design aspects of it is I'm going to do like a ground up thing. I'm going to go from the base of the gimbal all the way to the top, and I'm going to discuss all the various bits that I think are worth noting. I'm also going to be comparing heavily to the older versions of the gimbal, so let's start with the base. Now with the G4, here is the G4. With the G4, it had a very annoying, in my opinion, on-off switch that was housed in the bottom. So this was all fine if you were just using the G4 as a gimbal, no problem at all. If you, however, bought a extension pole, which Feiyu-Tech offered, which used the internal thread of this kind of additional screw-in button, the problem is with that is that what you had to do is you had to click your gimbal on, screw the thread in, put your pole on, use your gimbal, and then you had to unscrew your pole, click the button off, and then and then you're done. So you couldn't really have that pole on and continually use your gimbal. You couldn't walk through the day using it. Just daft, it really was crackers. So happy to say that button has now gone. I'm happy also to say that if I hold this up, on the G4S there is still the internal thread and it still fits the original poles. So if you've got the original carbon fibre poles, which were very nice, they still work. You also have a 1/4 inch thread for a tripod mount in the base of it, very similar to Zion and their Z1 Evolution. Nice feature. I'm glad they didn't shy away from putting that in there because it's a good thing to have, and you can put it on a tripod, a monopod, anything like that. Moving up the gimbal then, we've got the usual knurled aluminium, excellent quality, fantastic finish. Never had a problem with that on these handheld gimbals from Feiyu-Tech, really nice to see. Moving to the control side of things, we've got your single push buttons here. We've also then got the addition, so compared to the G4, this now has a nice little thumb joystick. And that allows you to control the panning and the tilt of your camera whilst you're actually holding it, so you don't all have to rely on your wrist movements to control that. Again, identical pretty much to the Z1 Evolution from Zion, and again another feature that I think is just a nice thing to have on there. I don't necessarily use it too much, however it's something, especially the tilt function, it's nice to be able to control that via that joystick, so it's a good option there. The single button push, that is now your on-off switch, and it's also your mode selection switch, and they've actually improved that in terms of the number of modes. The modes themselves are kind of similar to the G4, however there are some alternatives in terms of what happens when you push this 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 5 6. I think it's up to 6 different presses that do different things. I'm not going to go into that right now. I'm going to show you that when I do the actual bench test, so you can see what it actually does in terms of how it affects the gimbal. However, that illuminates blue, as you'll see later on, just like it did on the G4. Swinging around to the back, usual USB port, but what you can see here, if I hold this up, USB port has got a nice little rubber cover on it, and that rubber cover is actually built into the gimbal, so you're not going to lose that, which means that if you're using it in conditions like snow or sand or places where you don't want to drop it necessarily, but stuff could blow into it, it's always nice to know that you're not going to remove that and it's going to disappear somewhere. So a nice feature to see that. Moving on upwards then, this is where things get really interesting in my opinion. So again, grabbing the G4, if we put them side by side, you can see that the motors are the same width, same diameter, no major changes. In fact, this entire base kind of pan motor here is all pretty much identical looking. However, there are some major changes. If you look at the back support arm, you can see that on the G4 it's quite short and stubby, whereas on the G4S it's quite long. Now what this meant on the G4 is basically, if I swing it around like this, you can see that the camera can never go parallel with the gimbal itself. It can never swing fully around, so it's parallel with it. Indeed, that was kind of a preventative lock to stop it from going further than a certain point. Likewise, in the gimbal itself, you can hear if I rotate the arm round, there's a lock, and there's a lock there. So basically it means that you cannot physically move this more than about 270 degrees. To demonstrate that better, let me just grab its much older brother, which is the G3 Ultra, so the first one of these 3-axis ones, and that actually had a physical bar doing the job. So that would actually stop it there, swing it around, and that would stop it there. Likewise, if we look at the back motor, there's actually a bar here, just there where my finger is, and again, if I swung it too far, it would impact. And likewise, if I swing it the other way, it would impact, and wires were getting in the way, everything. And that's how they used to do it with that. They got rid of that on the G3 Ultra, which was nice, and they put all of those locks. So again, if I swing this around, there's no external locking mechanism, but there is an internal one that stops it from rotating. So that would basically make it so you couldn't overextend that gimbal. Now that's all well and good, but the problem is with that is that when you're filming, you wouldn't necessarily know where that lock was coming, so you'd hit that lock and you'd notice that jerky motion. Moving over to the brand new G4S, what I'm delighted to say is that those locks have completely disappeared. And the reason they've disappeared is, as far as I can tell, they are all 360 degree using I assume, a slip ring. So as you can see there, I can swing it all the way around, and I can swing it all the way back. I can swing that all the way around, I can swing that all the way back, and that goes with all of these motions. Now, not only does that mean that that's great from the point of view of using the gimbal, but also from a storage perspective, if you didn't want to use this case and you just wanted a super slim case, look at that, you can actually have it in kind of a wand format, where it's all in one and you keep it in one single piece, and then you're really not using a lot of space if you were to create a little case like that. So a very nice feature there. The most important thing, and again this is something that Feiyu-Tech don't really shout too much about on their literature, is that from the point of view of moving around and actually using this, it means there's no lock that you're going to hit. So the only thing that you're going to have happen is if you sort of over rotate your gimbal via your wrist, it might suddenly think, oh well, he's trying to turn it this way. So you have to get used to it, but the point is there's never that point where all of a sudden in your nice smooth footage you're going to get this horrible clunk where the camera just shakes and physically moves, and often because of the motors that you'd hear a buzzing noise because the motors were straining at that point. So it really is quite a nice feature. It's going to allow you a much freer, smoother motion, but you just have to teach yourself where those limits are when you move this. If you move like this around here and you don't rotate this, then it's all going to be fine. If you move around this and you accidentally rotate downwards, the camera's going to say, oh, he wants to move me this way. So your camera is, instead of staying nice and smooth straight forward, your camera's going to go, oh, and then it's going to tilt forward like this, and you're going to think, oh, it's glitching out, what's it doing? You have to learn where your wrist is and the rotation on your wrist to get that right. But again, really nice feature, I think, that they've done that. If it's a slip ring, fantastic. If it's not, then all I would say is don't sit there spinning it continuously. If there is a wire in there and you're doing that, it's going to put some horrible strain on it, and at some point I might brave opening it up and seeing how they're doing it. I'm hoping it is a slip ring, because that's the way that you should do it, but given the form factors haven't changed, I'm a little bit dubious as to whether that's the case. Anyway, again, haven't got time to go into too much detail on that, otherwise this is going to be a 9-hour long video. The next thing to look at, the way that the camera actually mounts to the gimbal. Again, looking at the historical way of doing it, thumb screws. So if I undo these thumb screws on the G4 that I have here, slide the camera out, okay, fine, nice and easy to do. However, look at that. This was always a little niggle for me. These are really spindly little bits of metal, they bend easily. You throw that in a camera case, you're going to bend them, you're going to get them snagged on cables, you're going to scratch the bejesus out of something in there. If you've got other cameras or other equipment in there that you don't want to be, you know, snagged or dug into, it just, for me, it just wasn't a good way of doing it. And also, you know, with this design it was fine because you couldn't lose this bar. With the G3 Ultra, if we go far back on that, you actually had to almost physically remove the bar completely, and then you could lose the bar, and you could potentially lose your thumb screws as well. So again, it's nice to see that there is an evolution all the way through, because on the G4S, if we look at it, so I'm going to move this a bit closer to the camera. Basically, it's a plastic clip, and it is literally a clip. So you just unpop it from these holes, and it just comes undone like that. Nice and simple. If you lost that, frankly, Thingiverse, something like that, a 3D print would be so easy to do. You know, you could have some spares, anything like that. Yes, it's annoying that you could lose it, definitely, but you know, it's nice that it's a nice simple fit, and there's a bit of foam padding on there as well, so they've given some consideration to dampening and not scratching the hell out of the front of your camera, which is, again, it's little details like that which I do like to see. So nice to see a change in that respect. Now, removing that, the next thing, and this is kind of like the biggest thing on this gimbal in terms of what people have noticed, is that if I slide the camera off, you can see that there is a mini USB connector. Come on, camera. There we go, mini USB connector inbuilt to the metal housing there. It's not removable, it is not optional, it is there, and it is basically how you use this gimbal. You slide the camera in, and it just connects up to it. Now, fantastic. What does that give us? Well, it gives us options, basically. The great thing is that you don't even have to use it. It's just there, and it's holding your camera. You know, you can actually get away with almost not having the clip because of that. You know, so it's holding it securely. However, what it also gives us the ability of doing, if we want to, is we can choose to send video output from the GoPro down the gimbal, through that USB connector down the gimbal to this front USB port, and then using the included USB to mini jack wire, we can then plug it into an external monitor. Obviously it's going to be analog, but it's still going to give you the ability of looking at it. That's, you know, a nice thing, and I'll talk a little bit more about how that can be useful in a moment. The other thing that we can do, and again we've got an option to do it, we're not forced to do it, is we can say, you know what, I would like to be able to use the internal batteries of my gimbal to help boost the power or charge my Hero 4. You could power a Hero 4, technically speaking, without a battery in it, but because of the whole balance issue with gimbals, I strongly recommend that you leave the camera battery in there, and that you only really use that option as an emergency. So let's say you're filming something, a continuous piece, a music piece or something like that, you suddenly realise you've been filming in a high resolution and your camera's about to die on you. What you've got the ability of doing is saying, you know what, I would prefer to sacrifice the life of my gimbal on the understanding that I get that shot finalised than I would to actually, you know, lose power in my gimbal but also not have any any video footage of the end of that shot. So it allows you to do that, and depending on the way that you're filming, if you've got a Hero 4 Black and you're filming in 4K, it's going to cane the battery of your camera, it's going to cane the battery of the internals of these, but it gives you that option to sort of say, oh my god, I've got a little bit of power, I can keep shooting this, I can opt to do it. Now, how do you opt, yes or no? Well, you do that via these little dip switches. So if I go to the back here, you can see there's a little panel upside down. Let's turn it upside down. There we go. And basically you've got C for charge and you've got V for video. So all you do is you flick those to say, oh, I would like charge on, and that means that it says, okay, no problems, I'll send 5 volts from the gimbal battery to the camera via that USB port. Likewise, if you say video on, it will send the output of the camera to the USB. Now you'll also notice, just going back to that there is a micro USB slot here. What that actually allows you to do is you can plug in a micro USB cable, which isn't provided, I have to say, and you can plug that into there, and that allows you to access the features from your camera. So you can get to the SD card, you can get to the settings, if you plug it into a PC. The fact that you can slot it off so easily, frankly, highly unlikely anyone's going to ever need to do that, but it's nice to have an option, I think, to be able to do that. So it's a little thing that is just nice to see. Now, is everything fantastic and good about having that USB connector? Well, as many people will probably have cottoned on to by now, not necessarily. It's great. If you own a Hero Silver and you use it like I do, fantastic. No problem. You've got exactly what you want out of it. However, let's say you use a Hero 4 Black. How do you see the output of a Hero 4 Black? It doesn't have an LCD screen. Well, of course, you buy an LCD backpack. Hang about, an LCD backpack bolsters your camera up and doesn't allow you to plug your USB in. Okay, well, can we get rid of... Oh, no, we can't get rid of that. Boom. You cannot use a backpack with this gimbal, plain and simple. And that's a shame because, the Z1 Evolution and even the G4, in fact, have motors that are overly powerful that will allow you to add a bit of weight to these gimbals, and use backpacks with them. So you could have a battery backpack or you could have an LCD backpack. If you have got a Hero 4 Black, at the moment as it stands, you cannot go that route with your LCD backpack. It just isn't an option. So does that mean you can't use a Hero 4 Black with it? No, you can still use a Hero 4 Black with it, but you are constrained to either sending video out to your USB and then having an external monitor fitted via a GoPro bracket or something, maybe a clamp that I design later on, or by using a Wi-Fi device like a RemoveU P1 or R1 for you to then see the output. Downside to that is, of course, it's a Wi-Fi device, so there's some latency, so there's some lag, and you're not going to see an absolute live video, and of course it's on your wrist, and that's not necessarily perfect for you. And there's also the downside that if you're using a Hero 4 Black in 4K with Wi-Fi, you're going to have about half an hour battery life, and then it's done. So you're definitely going to be using the gimbal power for that. So frustrating for a lot of people, but let's face it, this has probably been designed on the understanding that you've got a Hero 4 Silver, but they have alienated a proportion of people, especially those who like using 4K at the moment in 30 frames a second. So that's a bit of a shame. The other downside I think that is just worth mentioning, and it's a niggle more than anything, is that this USB port is encased in the metal. It's behind the metal. If, let's say, you're doing some skateboarding, something like that, and you're holding your camera and you fall off, there's quite a lot of weight in this gimbal, in terms of inertia, shall we say. If it impacts the camera on a corner, we know these GoPros will stand up to it, but the problem is the failure point in terms of that USB port is probably going to be the GoPro USB port, not the actual plug on the gimbal. What I would have liked to have seen as a designer, I would like to have seen that being a separate plastic board, maybe, that's held in via a ribbon cable. It's secure, but it's a designed failure point, on the understanding that if you use this in an extreme environment and you have a knock, that you're not going to destroy the internals of your camera doing it. But let's face it, you don't really want to drop any of it. So again, it's a bit of a niggle more than anything, but something that you need to just bear in mind. So they are the major design changes, and again, I think it's just worth noting all of those, because a lot of the stuff, especially the fact that the motors spin 360 degrees, a lot of those things aren't really highlighted by Feiyu-Tech particularly well in their actual literature or on their website, and I think that's something to me that really sets this gimbal aside, especially from, you know, the G4. So if you are a G4 owner, that really does make a bit of a difference to whether or not you actually want to consider doing it. Of course, the ultimate key to all of it is the performance, and, you know, whether or not it's glitchy, whether or not it holds a horizon, everything like that, and that's what we're going to now take a look at. So what I'm first going to do, I'm going to move on to show you how the gimbal works in the various modes, and then again after that what you'll do is you'll actually see the proper footage in use in a real world environment, and, you know, out doing some testing as well. So hopefully that will give you everything that you need to know about this gimbal, and you can then make a you know, a justified decision as to whether or not you want to spend the $350 odd that it is to actually purchase. So with that, let's move on to the next section. So what we're now going to do is we're going to take a look at some of the modes. We're going to look at how to change into those modes, what those modes do, you know, how they affect the gimbal, and some of the you know, the pros and cons of some of this stuff, and the new features that are on the gimbal. So just flying through this as quick as possible, really. To turn the gimbal on, then we just hold our finger down, and it will come on. Now if you hold that finger too long, you'll find that you go straight into lock mode. So at the moment it should be in single flash, so single blue flash panning mode. So that means that when I rotate the gimbal around, it pans around. If you hold it for too long, what you'll find is you're in lock mode, which if I press once after being in panning mode, the light is permanently on, and you can see that no matter what I do, the camera is now fixed in a specific point in space. Not a problem. If you want to come out of it, you just single tap. Again, you get a single flash and you're in panning mode. So that's the difference between panning and lock mode. Lock will hold the tilt. It will hold, basically it will hold the camera in whatever position you leave it. Now when you're in any of these modes, you still have access to your joystick. So if we go left, it will actually go left with the camera. If we go right, it will go right with the camera. And then we've got an inverted tilt. So in other words, if I push up with the joystick, the camera will pan down, and if I pull down with the joystick, the camera will pull up. Now that's going to be a bit kind of love or hate for people, because especially if you've played on console games, you'll know that sometimes if you're playing a first-person shooter on a console game, some people prefer the inverted and some people don't. This is at the moment unchangeable, so just bear that in mind. I believe the Zion one actually uses the opposite, where going up with the joystick tilts the camera up, and coming down with the joystick tilts the camera down. Now I have to admit I prefer the inverted myself, so this is more kind of common ground for me, but I think again it's a personal choice, and at the moment as of firmware version 1.25, which this is on, that's not something that you can actually switch. Now the other thing to bear in mind when you're using the joystick, that it will not self-center once you've taken your finger off. So you can see this is now at 90-degree angle to the back of the shaft, but it's not going to come back around. It's always going to remember where that is. So when you do fiddle around with the joystick, you need to remember that if you're holding this, you want to get it back so it's kind of level and in line with the rear of the gimbal. That's the basic panning mode anyway. Now let's say we're walking along, we come to a bridge and we want to look over and look at the river below us. We tilt forward, and of course it's holding the horizon. So we don't want that. We want to be able to look down at that water. So all we've got to do is we've just got to double tap, tap tap, and you can see now what happens is it automatically recognizes that we're tilting forward and we can look at the water below on the bridge. Now when you're in this mode, again, you can use the joystick, you can do the tilt yourself, you can do the panning, but what you can also do is you can lock the camera off. So let's say you tilt forward, something's really interesting down there, single tap, and you can see now you can move around, you can jostle around a little bit, and the camera is going to be stayed on that point down there. If you want to come out of it, you simply tap. Now we're in panning mode, so you've got to bear in mind that if you want to come out and tilt it back up again, you've got to double tap. So tap tap, we're back into tilting mode, and then we're back resetting the gimbal back to where it was. So they are kind of the three basic modes of operation that you're going to be using on a daily basis. Now there is an inverted mode which came along with the G4 and also the G3 Ultra. Now what this allows you to do is basically have the gimbal upside down. So if you wanted to walk along and do a nice low shot, the idea is that you triple tap 1, 2, 3. The camera will flip around, and that means that you can now hold it upside down, and you've got all of these modes available again. So you've got the tilt, so if we double tap we can look up, look down, and if we wanted to lock it off, single tap, and that's locked the gimbal. Now that's all good, there's no problem with that at all. What you've got to bear in mind is if you haven't got the orientation, the auto orientation on your gimbal set on your camera, set up, then you're going to have a point where you're going to have to flip that in post-production. So bear that in mind if you choose that mode. Now if we triple tap again, 1, 2, 3, it'll flip the camera around, and then we're back to normal. Now the thing that surprises me slightly in terms of this review is the fact that because there are no locks, so in other words on the G4, as I've talked about, you couldn't rotate the camera all the way around. Because there are no locks, the easier way of doing it, to be honest, is that. So if you just flip your camera all the way around, you're in inverted mode, but your camera orientation stays exactly as it was. And as far as I can see, there's no downside to doing it that way. The only thing you've got to bear in mind is if you do rotate too far, like this, there is a slight part where basically the IMUs are trying to work out what you're doing. Are you twisting this way? Are you twisting that way? And there's a little feeling of crunchy motors, a bit of glitching going on there. You know, if you do it quickly, it soon recognises that you're in this mode and there's no issue with it. So again, I think it's probably more a case of they've made that feature an inherited feature from the older models that wasn't really needed on this, because you can manually flip it over yourself, but it's an option if you want to do that. So with that said, what we're now going to do is we're just going to look at a couple of other things that you can do with the gimbal. I'm just going to turn it off completely. Okay, so that is now completely off. There's no light, anything like that. Now let's say for example that you got it out of the box and you realized, like I have now actually, that your horizon was ever so slightly off. So in other words, your camera was, you know, just tilted. I mean, that's an extreme case, but you could just notice that your horizon wasn't perfect. In previous iterations of these, what you'd have to do is you'd plug it into a bit of software, which took a while to come out, and you'd then manually adjust the roll. What's really nice with this is because we've got the joystick, they've now made it possible for you to do that manually yourself. So for example, the footage that you'll see from the drone show, I noticed that there was ever so slightly lower on the left than it was the right. I didn't notice this when I was holding the gimbal, but it was clear in the shot that it wasn't quite perfect. So what we need to do to do that, we're just going to turn the gimbal on again. So standard mode, and we just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So a lot of them. Then you've got a flashing blue light there. Now what that allows us to do, and it's very, very, very subtle movement, so you're probably not going to be able to see it very clearly on this camera, but if you now hold the joystick left, what that's doing is that is going to push this motor up. So it's basically now rolling the camera ever so slightly. So if I keep holding it and keep holding it, you should just about be able to see that the top line of this camera is now completely skewed. It's not on the horizon. Whereas if I hold down to the right and hold it long enough, you'll see that very, very slowly, and it is really nice and, you know, very, very, very intricate detail in terms of the steps here. It is ever so slowly coming back, and we want to try and get it as level as possible. And on the camera, it's probably going to look a little bit different on the camera than it does with the human eye, but that's getting it a lot closer. And then certainly from the camera shot, I would say that's pretty much where we want to be. Again, you know, where I'm looking at it from behind the camera, it looks slightly off, but you basically tune it that way. That's how you do it. Once you're happy that the horizon is as you want it, single tap to save. You'll notice that the motors are all dead. Then we can now turn it back on with another single tap, and it's remembered that. So that's how you adjust the horizon, which is a nice little feature. Again, you know, you want to do some tweaking with that. Take a shot, look at the footage, make sure you're happy with the horizon. Now, the other thing, I'm just going to turn it off again. The other thing that you can do, let's say you notice some weirdness, some drifting, so you're holding the camera and all of a sudden you notice that it suddenly starts moving on its own, or it's just not doing something that you really want it to. It could be that it's been knocked around a little bit and the IMUs need resetting. Not a problem. What they've now done with this is an initialization mode, which is very simple to do. Again, all you got to do, you turn your gimbal on. So that's in standard mode, so that's in panning mode. And what you then do is you put it in standby mode. And to do that, you simply hold the button for 1 second. Now what that does is it's now gone limp. So the light is still flashing. And it means basically there's quick access. So if I tap on that, it will come back on. But I'm in standby mode. So what I now do is I get it to a point where I'm ready to put it down. Because what we're going to do is we're going to lay it flat. So all I do is I go 1, 2, 3. The light goes on firmly, you lay it down and you don't move it, and then 1, 2, 3 flash, that tells me that it's on. I can pick it up now, I can now press the button and it will come back on, and that has now reinitialized the IMUs. So in theory everything should be, you know, back to playing as it should do. There shouldn't be any weird drift issues or anything like that. So that's something that you used to have to do from the software, which was always a bugbear because you had to download it, you had to plug it in, you had to do all of that faffing around, and people with Macs, as they still are unsupported. So that was something that was, you know, a real issue for people. It's not as comprehensive as the calibration for the Zion Z1 Evolution, if you've ever seen that. Maybe in a good way, because that's really complicated, but maybe that also makes sure that all of the IMUs and all the motors are a little bit better calibrated than the G4S. So, you know, time will tell on that. You know, we'll have to see. And please follow along with my blog. There's going to be kind of a blog that's flowing, and people can comment on RC groups if people are experiencing problems. If I experience problems, you know, there will be a continual flow to that. So anyway, but that is the bench test of everything. So after we've done this, now what it's all about is seeing some proper footage, real world footage, getting out there and seeing how it performs out in the real world. So off we go into the British sunshine. Now I have to admit, this entire country is completely underwater at the moment, and finding a day where it wasn't howling with wind and there was actually a bit of blue sky was very rare. I couldn't find anything over Christmas that was like that, and to be honest, I don't think it's been like this probably for the best part of 3 months, and it rained almost instantly after I got home. As you'll see as I go under this bridge, you'll see the state of what England's like at the moment. I'm very, very, very fortunate, it has to be said, that you know, I don't have my entire road system and house system and every system under that amount of water at the moment. There's a lot of very, very unlucky people out there in the UK, and a big shout out to anyone who's going through that misfortune at the moment up north at the moment, because they really are having a horrible time of it with, you know, houses that are 6 foot underwater. Anyone who's doing that, who are in the hobby and watching this video, like I say, a big shout out to you guys, because I just dread to think what that must be like to go through, especially the number of times you've had to go through it. So I count my blessings every day for not having that. Anyway, let's just get back to the test. So what are we doing here? Well, I'm riding a bike, as you can probably tell by now, and if you haven't, then that's probably a good testament to the gimbal. You can see I've done a bit of a picture-in-picture shot. Perfect example of the wonkiness of the top right-hand shot there. That's my Hero 4 Black camera filming basically the back of the gimbal, so you can see what the gimbal's doing, you can see what modes I'm doing, you can see if my thumb's moving around on the joystick. Not perfect, unfortunately, because I am riding a bike with one hand at the same time, but hopefully it gives you an idea of what the gimbal's doing. So you can see, for example, there I'm using the thumb stick to actually move it and do a pan shot, rather than actually twisting my wrist round at the moment. So you can see kind of the sort of shot you can get from a steady pan even whilst riding a bicycle. The picture below it is from the blocky thing that you can just about see on the front of the gimbal. Now that is in fact a GoPro Hero 4 Session camera, which I've mounted very simply just using a handlebar mount. Fits very nicely on the on the G4S. You just put it around the top motor mount, just below the motor obviously, so you don't want it spinning around with it. But that gives you a nice impression of, you know, how bumpy the road is, what kind of movement you would normally get if you didn't have the stabilization. So a lot of information to take in, I appreciate that, but you know, you can replay this, you can compare those videos. I'd like them to be slightly bigger, but unfortunately, you know, you want to be able to see the main shot as big as it is, so hopefully that's at least useful to you. So as I'm riding along, you know, I'm not doing extreme biking, I'm not doing any extreme sports, anything like that. I would love to do it, I would enjoy it, I know for a fact, but I don't really have any extreme sports that I get into myself, so this is the best that I can do to just kind of put this thing through its paces. What I'm doing at the moment is I've got it into mode 2, and you can see again from the top right that was literally hanging the gimbal right over my front wheel, just so we could see how it reacts. Some of the things that we're looking at in this review footage, so as we're looking through this test footage, the main thing on any gimbal is its ability to keep the horizon where it is. That's something that is so crucial to it. So as you can see at the moment, if we just look at that horizon, I would say that my horizon on the left hand side is ever so slightly too high. Now on previous iterations of the Feiyu-Tech gimbals, that would be a real pain, because basically that would have meant that the IMU was mounted with a slight glitch in it, and it was very difficult to kind of iron that out without having to undo screws and move it around and do manual tweaking. As we've already seen, there is the calibration mode that we can do without having to plug it into a computer or anything like that. So what I'd be able to do is get a bit of test footage, and this is obviously, if you're an owner of one of these, what you want to do, get some test footage, decide whether you're happy with the horizon as it is, and then do some tweaking. Don't just go out into the field expecting it to be perfect first time. As you can see, this is now after a bit of tweaking, so this is a much better horizon. Again, maybe not quite perfect, but the most important thing is that horizon line is dead flat. You know, that's what we don't want to see moving around. In fact, if you look in the top right hand corner, what I've just activated is the lock mode. So that's basically pointing the camera at a fixed point. So whenever it moves now, that's me moving the camera using the joystick. So as you can see, top right again, you can see it's pointing to the right, and now it's panning around. Now I've done that pan, that's my thumb that's done it. And again, the thing to remember there is that when you activate that mode, wherever the camera is pointing, you are now manually in charge. So if you want that to be back pointing dead forward, then you need to move it yourself. You won't expect the gimbal to compensate. So if it's at a 90-degree angle and you leave it there, it will always be at a 90-degree angle as you're walking along. So you know, nothing too bad. Now this moment here is very interesting. You can see there's a nasty bit of vibration and a bit of a wobble. Now what I'm not entirely sure of there is whether it was the terrain. The terrain I was going over was bumpy, there's no denying it, you can see, but there are elements of the terrain that I'm going over there that weren't very bumpy, and my bike has got reasonable suspension and it was wobbling. Now what I suspect that probably is maybe a resonant frequency. It may be that there was just a certain amount of vibration that just created the arm of the gimbal to wobble about a little bit, you know. And it is something that needs to be mentioned, is that when you're using a gimbal, and I stress this so many times in my reviews, it will not compensate out bumps. The three axes are designed to keep it stable, but as you can see, I'm now off my bike and I'm walking. You can see there's an up and down bobble. If you look at the picture on the right hand side, the middle picture coming from the Hero 4 session, you can see the sort of wobble that you get when you're normally walking around without stabilization. But you can see in the main picture that there is an ever so slight bump up and down, and maybe a little jarring motion from time to time as I sort of impact the road. And that is purely for the fact that your feet, as you hit the ground, resonate through your body, they go up to your arm and they will create a bounce, and that's always going to be visible on a camera like this until they come out with some kind of suppressed sort of suspension that, you know, maybe a magnet or something that rides up and down smoothly on that shaft. Then you're not going to be able to compensate that out. So it's something you want to bear in mind. What I have done, however, here is I've now tilted the whole gimbal forward. Now by doing that, that should compensate some of that bounce out, because you can now kind of use your arm as suspension to try and smooth it out a little bit. But again, for managing expectation, if you're going to buy one of these gimbals, don't think for a second that you're always going to be able to get rid of that. You can do an element of it in post, but generally speaking, you're always going to have a slight bit of motion to it. It's very difficult to do, and that's why people use steady cams and things that the kind of the manual way, because actually they can be slightly better than a 3-axis gimbal for actually compensating out those bumps, you know, and that kind of up and down motion. So just bear in mind. However, again, let's look at the horizon. Nice and flat, nice and smooth. It's not moving at all as I pan around. So that's me just panning around using the joystick. There's no movement of the horizon. That's me doing a little up and down tilt there. And what I'm going to do any moment now is I'm going to actually rotate it around, and I'm going to actually put it in its inverted mode. Unfortunately, I did forget on the GoPro to put it into its automatic orientation mode, which means that it doesn't automatically flip the shot. So I do that manually using Adobe Premiere, as I am using to edit this footage. But as you can see, again, doing these nice slow pans, that's me actually rotating myself around instead of actually the gimbal. And now what I've done is I've put it back into lock mode. So now what's happening with the gimbal is that I've said basically point it right at the end of that road, and now as you can see I've done the flip around and we've gone into the selfie mode, as it's called for some reason, but basically that means that we can now hold it down low. So this camera is now dangling down by my legs, and sure enough you can see my legs walking along, just so you can get a bit of a dynamic shot. Now obviously when you're doing this you still have the bumping issue, there's no denying that, but again the thing to look for is the horizon, and you can see that at the moment that horizon is staying nice and firm. There's no signs of weird wobbles or glitching or anything like that, and as far as I'm concerned this is doing very well at the moment. I'd say maybe right at that point in time there was a bit of a horizon drift possibly, but again I think I'm being a bit of a harsh critic because I am moving this around all over the shop in its various extents, as I'm kind of tilting it down so we get this dynamic walking shot. And as you can see from the footage in the top right hand corner, you can see where the pole is facing. So the pole is right now facing forwards, even though the camera is tilting down right at my feet. So as we're walking by the structure, you can kind of see the bumpiness that we're going through on this terrain whilst we're walking along, and you get this nice dynamic shot. So quite an interesting one there. Nothing really to report as we walk along here, so what I'll do is I'll pick this back up when I get the pole extension attached, and then we'll do a few shots from that. Okay, so as you can see in the top right hand corner, what I am doing right now is I am screwing in the carbon fibre extension pole, which is available as an extra from Feiyu-Tech. Not ridiculously expensive, they're actually a little bit cheaper these days because it actually came out for the G3 Ultra, so there are a few shops, if you're lucky, that are selling them thinking that it's an obsolete product, whereas actually it's completely relevant to a modern day product like the G4S, so keep an eye out for that, and if I can find some cheap links then obviously I'll post them on the video as well. Now, why am I using a pole? Well, I just want to get some, you know, slightly more dynamic shots. It aids you in, you know, getting nice low sweeping shots. You can get some selfie shots. If you're a person who does a lot of, well, cycling and things like that, then well worthwhile investing in it, because it is a nice solid unit. It's a carbon weave, very good carbon weave, very lightweight. The only thing that I would say is that you're only supposed to ever sort of slot 2 of them together. So if you do own 2 of them, then it's no problem. Feiyu-Tech say if you put 3 together, then it can actually weaken the mounts. And I have to admit, on the one that I had, after a while, what I found was the glue that was holding the aluminium to the carbon rod actually started coming a bit brittle, and I was able to crack it open. All it needed was a bit of epoxy to put it back. Not a major problem, but obviously if you're scooting along at 60 miles an hour on a motocross bike or something like that, then that's going to be an issue. Now, the other thing to mention at this point is that, of course, if you're using an extension pole like this, then your fingers are not going to be very easy to get onto the buttons or the joystick. Now, Feiyu-Tech do a Wi-Fi remote, and unfortunately, really unfortunately, they forgot to actually put it in the box with my one. Now, you don't get it included, so don't get that impression. It was purely for the fact that I wanted to have the complete package so I could do a full review. So, you know, I said to them, can I have the Wi-Fi remote? Can I have the G4S? It was a bit of a fight to get it as a review sample anyway, and unfortunately, they'd run out of stock on the Wi-Fi remotes anyway. So they've promised to send me one at a later date when they send my next product for reviewing, which hopefully will be the Mini 3D. But it's just worth bearing in mind that it is an option. How does it work? Very simple. It just plugs into the USB port on the front of the G4S, and then that sends the information from the remote to it, and then you can control the modes, and I believe you can also do the pan and the tilt and things like that as well. Hopefully when it arrives I can then do kind of an add-on video, which I'll put a link at the bottom of this video for as well, so you can see whether it's worth spending any more extra money on that, should you be using things like the Pole. So but it's very good. As you can see, you can get some very interesting shots using the Pole. What I've done there is I've kept it in mode 2. It's actually tilted the camera all the way around, so it's now upside down, and again I've used post-production to actually flip it, because I don't have the auto orientation mode on the camera before I set off, which is a bit of a failing by me, but still, as you can see, it gives you a nice interesting low to the ground shot as you're riding along. So with all of that said, I think at this point you can continue watching all of this. What I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to start talking about some conclusions. Why would you buy one of these? Should you buy one of these? Should you buy something different from one of these? Ultimately, it really comes down to your needs. You've got to bear in mind that a G4S, just like any of these handheld gimbals, they're designed for GoPro cameras. They will work, and some of them will work with non-GoPro cameras. The balance of a gimbal is always crucial to the quality of the shot. In a way, that's what I like a lot about the G4S, is because it's actually been designed around the Hero 4 silver camera, and I own a Hero 4 silver camera. Now the Hero 4 black camera is ever so slightly more heavy. On a G4S it has no bearing whatsoever on the quality of the shot. It has no issue with it. It's got solid motors, but then likewise its competitor, the Z1 Evolution from Zion, that also has no issue whatsoever with a little bit extra weight. What I do like about this gimbal is the fact that you get this complete kit. You get your gimbal, you get a carry case, you get 4 batteries when only you need 2 for the actual operation, so you get a spare set of that. It's all encompassed and it's all nice and neat. That is a real plus point for it. There's no wires to faff around with, the USB port that you just slide the camera onto, and then this quick release plastic clip. That is a real joy to use, and again, the competition, the Z1 Evolution, that doesn't have that ability. You've got a little cable that you've got to use if you want to power your GoPro rather than the USB plug-in port. You've got the annoying thumb screws, which are better on the Z1 Evolution than they were, say, on the Feiyu-Tech G4, but they're still a bit of a fiddle. You can bend them, you can break them, you can lose them. Ultimately I don't like them, and I think this clip-on method is really neat. The other thing that you've got to bear in mind with the Evolution is you don't get a carry case, and I really cannot rate how highly I find this carry case. It is fantastic. I've been carting around all over the place, and I just know that the thing's stable, and I can keep my Hero camera on the gimbal whilst it's in the case, and that's a fantastic feature. I can literally get this out and running within 3 minutes from a protected case to being on and being in use, and that's with the camera as well, which is a real plus point. The downside to the G4S, obviously there are going to be some downsides. Number one, I still feel a nagging fact that the Evolution from Zion, I just think their stabilisation is ever so slightly better than Feiyu-Tech. I'm basing that off the Z1 Tiny 2 flight gimbal that I've got, which blew me away. It absolutely blew me away. It was so much better than anything that I've seen before in terms of a third-party, non-DJI 3-axis gimbal, that it just made me think that their algorithms, their IMUs, their engineering, they really had, they were on the money. And the Evolution, the handheld version, really proved that point. It was as good in terms of stabilisation. Don't get me wrong, this G4S is proving to be fantastic, and I think it's so close in terms of its actual quality, in terms of the actual stabilisation, the horizon lock, everything, that it's very harsh for me to say that that's not a reason to buy it. The one downfall that you've got with the G4S, which is a plus point in some respects, the downfall is that you cannot use a backpack, and for people who own a Hero 4 Black, that is a real negative. If you want to use a screen on the back of a Hero 4 Black, then you have to plug it onto the back of it. you cannot plug that USB port in to this gimbal. You cannot fix it to it. It's impossible. It will not work. Don't try it. You have to use the camera, which is no problem. You can use the camera on its own, but you will not have a screen. You'd then have to invest in something like a Wi-Fi screen or use the app, which is a bit of a faff. There's latency. It's not ideal. So that really is the only negative. Don't forget also that this has the 360 degree without a lock, so you're not bumping into things when you're spinning it around. And again, the competition, the Z1 Evolution, doesn't have that, so again that's a plus point for this. So I think you have to make your own decisions. Why do you want it? Do you want the case? Is it that necessary? Are you going to use a backpack? But overall, this really is a very good purchase, and I have to admit that I would highly recommend this product for anyone who's looking for a handheld gimbal. Hopefully that's been of help. I hope you haven't got bored of my voice, and thank you very much for watching, and see you on the next one.